Hey guys, it's me Jason, and welcome to our Written Escape, a place where we can just indulge in different types of stories. Most of the stories that I'll read on this channel are mine, like the one I'm going to read to you now. The story is titled My Little Boy. It's about a young woman named Allie. She has always wanted a child but hasn't gotten a chance until now. In a dark alleyway, on the way to her car, she encounters a little boy named Yoshiki, who is a victim of child abuse and neglect. She decides to adopt Yoshiki and give him a better life than his previous, because she didn't want him to suffer the same fate as her old friend, who died of suicide from not being adopted and the endless abuse. So without further ado, here's part 1 of My Little Boy. I was walking the streets, the cold, rainy streets, umbrella over my head and purse on my shoulder. As I walked near an alleyway I heard crying. I looked over and saw someone curled up in a ball. Contemplating what to do, I weighed the decisions in my head. I mean, what if it's a killer pretending to be upset, or what if it's a rapist? But the sounds sound childlike, and the figure so small it could be a kid. I sighed, slowly approaching, but keeping what I thought was a safe distance, calling out to the person. Hey, you in the alleyway. The person seemed to be a little boy who had looked like he'd been battered so bad he was shaking. I got closer to him and he tried to get away from me. I frowned. Sweetie, I won't hurt you. I promise. He shakes his head, coughing. Tears spill. You don't trust me, do you? He shakes his head again, but suddenly grabs it and whimpers loudly. Next thing I knew, I was dialing 911. I gave the operator my best description of the little boy and where we were. I was told to keep a good eye on him and make sure he didn't go anywhere. The little boy looked at least 6 or even 5. He was just so small. After a little while, an EMT came. It took them a bit of encouraging to get the boy to cooperate with them. I had rushed to my car to follow them and arrived at the nearby hospital. Waiting in the ER for what felt like all night, but only a few hours. When the doctor came, he asked if I was his guardian. I shook my head. No, I just found him on the way to my car. I think he's homeless, I stated. The doctor nodded, and the nurse came over, whispering in his ear, and he smiled. Well, apparently, the little boy's given us the phone number of his parents, but he doesn't want to go back with them. I will still call them for questioning with child services. He informed me. I felt sorry for the little boy, thinking, what if his parents were truly the reason he was so beat up? Patiently waiting more, till I was told I could come and see the little boy. I learned his name was Yoshiki, and that he was 6 years old. The worst injury he had, oh, there were a few. Battered up ribs, busted eyebrow that gushed a bit of blood, a bad sprained ankle. Although nothing needed true full-on surgery, it was still pretty bad for a boy his age, or anyone. When his parents came, the social worker had already talked to Yoshiki privately. She wasn't happy. His parents glared at me with such hatred I could feel it burn a hole in me. A twosome were pulled aside while I was sitting with Yoshiki, who lay there shaking. Looked cold. His small, frail body quivered as his still wet hair dripped on the bed. Doctor said he was lucky he didn't catch anything awful. In his current state, I talked to him in a hushed voice, looking at him softly. Yoshiki, do you want a blanket? I asked. Giving a very small nod as a response, I asked a nurse for a blanket. She gingerly placed it over him. He mouthed the word, thank you. I smiled seeing he was okay, although not out of the woods yet, but he was in safe care. Yoshiki's parents were soon arrested for abuse, but someone needed to look after the little boy. The doctor and social worker talked about putting him in an orphanage. I shook my head, blurting out, without much thought, "I'll adopt Yoshiki." The two physicians looked at me with a bit of shock. Dr. Layton asked, "Are you sure, Allie?" I nodded without second thought. Recurring memories came back into my head. When I was younger, I had a friend named Rico. He was in the foster system and never got out. Once he turned 18, he committed suicide. He was my best friend. I hated to see him so torn apart. I don't want Yoshiki to go through that either, so I'm doing him a favor. The next day, I was pulled aside by a social worker. We had a conversation on what needed to be done before I could adopt Yoshiki. I was also so overwhelmed, but it wasn't stopping me. No way, no how. So guys, that was part 1 of My Little Boy. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Leave a like. Give me some constructive criticism. Like I said before, I'm still working on pronunciation, but I feel this was a bit better. Tell me what you thought of the story. Opinions would be nice. Just no hatred, please. To each his own. Hey, we all have one thing in common. They all want to be happy. Goodbye.